everyone. Welcome to the And God Said podcast. This is your host, Reverend Kimberly Constant, and I am taking you through a journey looking at every single book of the Bible, all the way from Genesis to Revelation. This is in conjunction with a Bible study that I offer as well, called Cover to Cover. And if you're interested in signing up for that and getting access to a weekly newsletter, which has a reading plan and discussion questions and the PDFs of all of my presentations, you can find more information on my website, KimberlyConstantMinistries.com. There's a registration link there. You can also join in. We have weekly discussion groups over Zoom, so you can join in wherever you live, and those are offered on Friday mornings and Sunday evenings. So please sign up. Don't worry about signing up, when we're already into the books of wisdom. No worries. We have people join us all the time new, and so we're happy to have you. You're also just welcome to listen along or watch these videos, and I'm happy to have you however you find your way here and participate. So we are continuing with our series on the wisdom books of the Bible, of the Old Testament. And this lecture, we're going to look at the book of Proverbs, which is the most wisdom-y of all the wisdom books. And so I've titled this lecture, Book of Wisdom. So in terms of authorship and dating, much like Psalms, we have a wide range here. There's several authors. Some of them are anonymous, just like with the Psalms, and they were compiled over a wide time span, somewhere between the 10th and the 6th centuries BC. So amongst the authors that have been named are Solomon. He is said to have written the majority of our Proverbs, and in general was said to have written something like 3,000 Proverbs, of course, many of which are found here in our Old Testament. There's also some others. There's wise men, and this is Proverbs chapter 22, verses 17 through chapter 24, verse 22, and then chapter 24 again, verses 33 through 34. And these are thought to have been attendants of Solomon. Then we have Proverbs written by a man named Agur, who is the son of Jacka, and King Lemuel. And those are chapters 30 and 31. And we will look at those in detail when we get to those segments. So in terms of genre, we have wisdom, of course, and then specifically proverbial wisdom. And they employ a lot of the same tools and techniques that we found in the book of Psalms. There's a lot of sound importance, which is always hard when we're translating from the ancient Hebrew, although it can be obvious. So for instance, Proverbs 10, chapter 10, verse 9a reads, "One who walks honestly walks securely." And so you can kind of see the sound rhythm there. Walks is mentioned twice, honestly and securely, both ending with L.Y. So there's a little bit of kind of a sing-songy nature. But in Hebrew, it's even more so. So in Hebrew, it would read, "Holek batom, chelek batah." So it's kind of that sing-songiness to it. And holek and chelek sound very similar to one another. We also will find frequent use of parallelism, which was also used frequently in the book of Psalms, and the frequent use of figurative speech, such as similes, metaphors, hyperbole, synecdoche, and of course, personification. And within this proverbial wisdom, we're going to highlight several themes, a lot of comparison and contrast. For instance, comparing wise versus foolish, either the path itself or the person. Something similar to what we saw in Psalms. We'll see a comparison between righteous versus wicked people, diligent versus sluggard people, rich versus poor, wicked women versus virtuous women. We'll find the theme of friendship pops up a lot in Proverbs. And of course, God's sovereignty, justice, provision, and protection. Sometimes more implicit than explicit, but kind of always there in the background. What we won't find, and what's typical in very traditional wisdom literature, we're not going to find references to the temple, to the priesthood, to prophets, to any of the events of redemptive history like the Exodus or the conquest of the Promised Land, or even exile. And we won't find reference to the covenant. This is very true of the most wisdomy of wisdom literature because it was meant to have a more universal quality to it. And so that doesn't surprise us. Now, in Psalms, we did see some of this come into play. There was actually a whole category of historical Psalms that does kind of hark back to things that happen in Israel, but we won't find that in Proverbs. Part of the wisdom in reading wisdom literature is in how we apply it. And that is really true with Proverbs because there's limits to wisdom. They are generalizations that we find, not absolutes. There are things that, for the most part, will be true, but there's no guarantee. So they're meant to be applied in certain situations, and the wisdom in knowing when and how to do so was part of wisdom literature. So it's not like you're just passively taking in this information. You're also putting it to work, knowing when to use it. Like, calling to mind. I'm in a situation, I'm trying to determine what's right versus wrong. I'm going to call to mind a certain proverb that will maybe help guide me. And so these sayings were meant to function in that way. They're meant to be effective guidance for life, but not necessarily a guarantee of results. They're always good to follow, but it's not going to bring automatic results. For instance, the proverb, train up a child in the way that they should go, and they will never depart from it. Well, unfortunately, we know that that is not always the case. You can train up a child in what you think as a parent is the right way, with a certain set of values and beliefs, with faith, teaching them to have faith in God. And that child, when they grow older, can choose to continue on that path or to choose their own course. And so it's not always a guarantee, but it is true a lot of times. I think we can say that. And there is wisdom in trying anyway. As a parent, as a community that is helping to bring up and raise children, grandparents, aunts and uncles, people in the church that teach Sunday school, we want to do everything we can to teach children about God, about faith, about right and wrong, about being good, kind, loving, caring people. And that's always a good thing. The result, in a way, doesn't matter. Yes, of course it matters, but it doesn't change how we act. We train up a child in the right way, and then the child gets to choose. And I think, hopefully for the majority of children, at some point they'll find their way back to that right path. So the best sages or wise people would tell people to make room for God to work surprises. That's actually featured wisdom within Proverbs. Is, humans make plans, but then God does what God does. And I tell this to my children all the time who are on the cusp of adulthood. And I've got a senior in college and a senior in high school and a freshman in college, freshman in high school. So it's a lot of life change coming upon us. And I say, make your plans, figure out some options, some roads that you would like to journey down, but then keep your eyes open and your ears alert and your mind at the ready to recognize when God opens a window or a doorway that you wouldn't have expected. Don't be so honed in on your path that you miss a unique or new opportunity. And also don't despair when it seems like an opportunity is, that path becomes close to you. God is at work, always, always, and he uses it all, and he works it for good, and I truly believe that. And so as humans, we do our best, we plan, we employ wisdom as best we can, we stick as close to God as we can, and then we understand that sometimes there's going to be surprises. Sometimes those will be wonderful mountaintop moments, and sometimes there'll be challenging things that really cause us to have to examine our faith and test our relationship with God. And it's all okay. It will all be okay. But we just need to be aware that that's coming. So in terms of structure, much like Psalms, there's a loose structure that holds all of the Proverbs together. Here there's sort of 8 different collections, and we distinguish these either by their subtitles or by a noticeable change in style. So Proverbs chapter 1, the first 6 verses function as a general introduction, anchoring the wisdom of the book to the time of the monarchy and specifically to King Solomon, who was ancient Near Eastern renowned for his wisdom. and it lends an international flavor. Because Solomon had such strong connections to the rest of the ancient Near East, and because he was so esteemed, he lends credence. His name means that these, proverbs would have been seen as something desirable for other cultures to adopt as well. Then in the next segment, which is the rest of chapter 1 through chapter 9, we have proverbs that loosely focus on the importance of wisdom itself. So in these, we find a contrast between the results of seeking and finding wisdom or pursuing a life of folly. In these, there is a teacher writing who addresses the pupil as son. He uses oral instruction, so figures of speech and expressions, again, meant to be mnemonic devices, things to help us remember. And there's a significant use of personification, especially in chapter 8, where wisdom is pictured as a woman calling the human family to follow her and to find meaning of life. Now, this can be interesting reading if we don't understand the true context of it, because it can almost sound like wisdom is being portrayed as like a god herself or a goddess, but that's not true. They would have understood that she is a creation of God. God created everything, including wisdom, and so she's not a separate deity. She is just personified to show the importance of finding wisdom, but that wisdom is found in having faith in the one true God. Then the next section, chapters 10 through 22, are called the Proverbs of Solomon. This is the oldest section, so these proverbs are not in any kind of chronological order. Same was true with the book of Psalms as well. Usually these consist of 2 lines, and the first 5 chapters, that structure is predominantly antithetical. So the second line is kind of the opposite of the first line, and that would have made clear negative and positive results of attitude or conduct, and really honing in on the conviction that there's 2 ways. We saw this a lot in the Psalms as well. There's the way of the righteous or the wise person, and the way of the wicked or the foolish person. And so they're honing in on that distinction. And then in chapters 16 through 22, we're going to see more of synthetic or synonymous parallelism, where the second line either completes the first or kind of reinforces it with some new information. And so in this section, we're pointing to this higher order, to the visible connections of wisdom and often knowledge as well. So here in all this section, we're going to see a lot of practical observations about everyday life rather than a lot of things specifically linked to Israel's faith. There are some proverbs that talk about the Lord, which is the name Adonai, which is God's personal name. But for the most part, some of these just you could pull out and not even know whether it was written by Israel or Egypt or some other ancient Near Eastern culture. So for instance, in chapter 13, verse 3, we read, "Those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin." So that's a truth that can apply to any culture, to any person, to someone living in 5000 BC, to someone living in 2023. We can all use that wisdom, and it's not specifically linked to God. Of course, it's in the background. It's implied. They would have understood that for Israel, wisdom was tied up in following God and having faith in Him. The next segment is called Words of the Wise, and this is chapter 22, verse 17 through chapter 24, verse 22. And these are attributed to some unknown group of sages or wise people. It's a little bit longer. They're longer. Each proverb is longer than the preceding section. They predominantly use that synonymous and synthetic parallelism, and they often feature admonition or exhortation. And a lot of times this parallelism is meant to give the reason or motivation for doing something. So, walk this way because then you will have a wonderful life, something like that. So they imply this idea of divine order and reinforce the ramifications for disobedience or obedience. And there are a lot of parallels here with Egyptian proverbs. So for instance, let me find one that I can use as an example. So here's one that's a parallelism in reverse. So it's chapter 22, verse 9. It says, "The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." So in the first verse, we get why. If you're generous, you will be blessed. That's why you want to be generous. And the action of being generous is sharing with the poor. So reinforcing the reason for doing so. Then we have a very creative title, Additional Sayings. This is chapter 24, verses 23 through 34. And here, I'm trying to turn to it as I'm talking. So here, some of you will have this highlighted with a separate subtitle, and sometimes it's not highlighted, but there's a bit of a change in what they're talking about. So this section is also written by anonymous sages, and it has a mixture of short and long proverbs, and these have within them a sense of moral, social responsibility. So for instance, let's look at chapter 24, verse 27. It says, "Put your outdoor work in order and get your fields ready. After that, build your house." So, get your outside ready, the thing that benefits kind of the rest of community, and then work on your own home. Then we have Proverbs 25 through chapter 29, and these are either called just more Proverbs of Solomon, or there can be the specific heading, Proverbs of Solomon copied by Hezekiah's men. Very specific. So what does that mean? Where they perhaps were copying from an older manuscript or from some kind of oral tradition. These were proverbs that they had heard that had been passed down, and they finally put them into a written form. These vary in length and most often feature a comparison. And then the next sections are the words of Agur and the words of Lemuel. So Proverbs 30, chapter 30, is the sayings of Agur. We don't know who he is. Scholars think he was from potentially the tribe of Massa, which is interesting because this tribe was descended from Ishmael, and they would have been located in northern Arabia, so not necessarily Israelites, but that is the nature of this type of wisdom literature. They would have definitely incorporated wisdom sayings from other culture groups. Of course, with the understanding in Israel's mind that everything is attributed to God. These feature a numerical pattern, which you'll see when you read. There's an X plus 1 pattern. So, for example, they'll say 3 things and then 4 things. So let me read you an example. Chapter 30, verse 15. It says, "There are 3 things that are never satisfied, 4 that never say enough." And this serves to create sort of feeling of anticipation. What are these things? And to aid in the memorization. And then finally, chapter 31 are the sayings of King Lemuel. Verses 1 through 9 are words from his mother to prepare him for office or for his duties as king. And then the majority, verses 10 through 31, are a description of his mother. And we believe it was a eulogy that he wrote in memory of her. And so she was clearly a wonderful woman. So the eulogy is not just one day in her life, but it reflects her entire life. And I love that Jewish people today continue to use this verse on a regular basis. For those Jews who celebrate the formal Sabbath dinner, they recite this to the women at the table, to their mothers and wives and grandmothers and aunts present. And I love that. How can I get my kids to recite this to me on Friday night? That would be nice, right? If we could read this in the original Hebrew, we would see that it's an alphabetical acrostic. So each verse begins with a different letter in the Hebrew alphabet going in alphabetical order. This would have, again, been a mnemonical device to help with memorization, but it also serves to affirm this picture of Lemuel's mother, of the wholeness of her, of the completeness of her life, and what a wonderful life it was. And so I love the advice she gives in the first 9 verses. Again, just thinking about my own kids who are, on the verge of setting off and starting this new phase in life. And she's like, don't spend your strength on women. Be careful with beer. And then she says, speak up. I love this. Verses 8 and 9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Such good advice, such practical advice. We could say these very same words to our children. And then in return, what he says about his mother. I mean, my goodness, right? Verse 25, she's clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. Skipping ahead to verse 28, her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. So beautiful. What a way to end the wisdom book. And I just love it that it's about a woman, because we know in the ancient Near East, unfortunately, women were on the margins of society. They didn't have a lot of agency. But look at the impact that this one woman had on her son. She gave him good advice. I think we can read between the lines and assume that he followed that advice, which is why he called her wise when he was eulogizing her and just describing the impact that she had, not just on her family, but on her entire community. So they may not have had much agency, but they were still extremely important, and they had a way of leaving their own mark. And I love that Proverbs ends with honoring the women of these Old Testament times. Yes, amazing. So the purpose of the Proverbs, really to clarify right and wrong conduct and to kind of ask and answer the question, what does it mean to be fully devoted to God? How do we live out our faith on a daily basis, on a practical basis, in raising our children and making friendships and choosing the right path to follow and abstaining from, going crazy with alcohol, just making good choices in life. And so it also functions in this way as an extended commentary on God's law, especially the law of love, that law that says, love God and love others in the New Testament even. This is how they were to do it. These are the ways that they could really love God and love others. And it helped to apply their covenant faith to everyday attitudes and activities and relationships. Again, like a normal, just everyday Israelite living in that time. How do I show my faith in God? So we are going to talk about this for our time when we get to the New Testament. We're going to have a whole week on talking about New Testament ethics, as difficult of a conversation as that will be. But this was that conversation in the Old Testament. And it still is applicable for us today because these are timeless. A lot of this wisdom can be pulled out and perfectly applied to our lives. We still want to train up a child in the right way to follow. We still want to tell our children as they leave the nest and move into the next phase of life, be careful with who you date. Watch your partying. And by the way, look out for people. Be someone that pursues the cause of justice. Like, that's good advice, no matter if you're living in 2000 BC or if you're living in 2023 as we are. So a rich book, again, not one that we can just read through quickly, but one to just pick a few every day and just kind of meditate on them slowly. Star the ones that really stand out to you and have meaning so that, you can just return to those when you are in need of bolstering wisdom for a situation. And the influence of Proverbs on the NT writers, the New Testament writers, is significant. We're going to find a number of outright allusions and quotations. For example, James 4:6 says, God shows favor to the humble, and that's a direct quotation of Proverbs chapter 3, verse 34. It's also, there's a lot of implied allusions to these Proverbs in the New Testament. And then, of course, Christ himself, Jesus Christ, is the fullness of God's wisdom. He is the best and most complete revelation of God that we have. He is the Word of God made flesh. So we have the Word of God on written paper, as we do with our Bibles, but we also have a relationship with the Word of God made flesh. and he fully reveals what wisdom looks like. He's going to teach us so much more when we get to the New Testament. And so there's a correlation between the personified wisdom of Proverbs 8 and even chapter 9 and Jesus Christ himself. In the Old Testament times, that personification was meant to delineate the choice before all people between God and the false gods of the ancient Near East. In our time, it illuminates the choice between following Jesus and having a relationship with Christ, accepting the grace that is offered through him, or following some other way, which would be, of course, a way of folly. All right, so that brings us to the end of Proverbs. If you're in the study and you're following along with the reading plan, it's going to look a lot like the reading plan for Psalms, where I've provided a selection for you to read. You can read what I've given you. You can choose other ones that seem interesting to you. I just tried to give you a sampling so you could see all the different categories that I just talked about. So enjoy your reading, and I'll see you for the next lecture, which will be on another one of my very favorite books. I feel like I say that a lot, right? But I really do love it. And it used to be my least favorite. Job and Ecclesiastes used to be my least favorite. And now I think they're my most favorite. So I'm excited to talk to you about the book of Ecclesiastes in the next lecture.